Mr. Kimball, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, let's
Ready or not?
let's begin. We'll call to order the delayed and rescheduled meeting from January and the regular meeting for February, and we'll stand to do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, first, we have a lot to cover today. Glad that we have a good audience of interested parties.
As always.
Joan, always interested. Glad to have you. So we're going to, I think Bob DiCrescenzo is going to be here in a few minutes, and we would like to take advantage of his presence for a couple of topics, so we may reschedule those when he arrives, talk specifically about the budget calendar, and so the items 6 and 7, things that we're dealing with relative to the state. So when he comes, we'll make that amended agenda. We'll start with the approval of minutes. This goes all the way back to our December 20th meeting. We, of course, remember we couldn't get together in January because of weather conditions and scheduling. I hope you had a chance to look at the minutes. I'm going to pass out some edited minutes that I did, which is what I would like to see this committee adopt is this board adopt is more abbreviated minutes, less about individual participants than it is topics discussed and actions taken. So we can certainly, we can approve the minutes as they were submitted with any edits that you'd like to make. But in the future, I'd like to see us sort of adopt a more abbreviated form of minutes, similar to what we've done on some of the other boards. So if you just look at that, we can discuss that. I'm going to recommend that. Were there any comments on the minutes that were, as they were submitted? All right, why don't we move that the minutes be adopted? They're looking for a motion for that.
So moved.
Seconded, moved by Mr. Pearl, seconded by Mr. Peterson. All in favor say aye. Aye. All right, we'll begin with the Finance Director's report and Town Quarterly Budget Update.
Are we going to discuss changing the format of the minutes? Or?
We can, but I would postpone that until after you've seen the edits that I made.
Okay, great. That's fine. I just thought you were saying you were just going to do it, so I was like, okay.
Well, I'm going to recommend that we do it, but because we didn't get those distributed before the meeting, you have a chance to review what I suggest, and we can put that on the agenda for the next meeting. All right? I'm in charge, but I'm not that authoritative. I hope. All right? Sean? We can move to the Finance Director's report. When Bob gets here, we will try to move down to 6 and 7. All right?
Sure. Does everyone have a copy from? This is again the Finance Director's report and quarterly update. So what you have in front of you are updated figures through December 31st, of 2016. Starting on the revenue side, as was in the news through the last week of December, remained true through January and February. There were the building department fees on the revenue side have been tracking unfavorably compared to last year. Certainly compared to last year, but compared to budget too. We're projecting, obviously this is an area that, there's highs and lows. Last year we had significant highs in building department revenues of about $1.1 million, which was about $500,000 more than we budgeted. This year we're tracking, I'm tracking us to be right around $575,000, which is a variance of about $173,000. So that's something we're monitoring closely, hoping for a busy and maybe early spring building season, which would help pick up that number a little bit. So let's hope for that. But we're monitoring that closely. And some of this can be a timing thing. Last year we obviously had some major land use fees come in from large projects, and if those come in June versus July, that can make a big difference in the yearly total.
So, yeah, so the big one is the Hartford property, what's the name of that? I keep forgetting.
The Silverman
Silverman Group is redeveloping that?
Yeah.
Right. So that one, that certainly.
What's the order of magnitude of that permit if they pull it?
I think I see, I don't know if you have more recent numbers on it.
Ballpark? I mean, is it more than half of this
It would
577,000?
be a significant, I think, there's some of the initial approvals, but I'd have to go to Jamie to confirm, but, yeah, we'd be looking, potentially, certainly once the full site plan comes in for, after being approved, once they come in for those permits, you're looking at, $200,000 and $300,000. But we can certainly get those numbers and forward those on for discussion.
So let's track that, because that's a meaningful variance.
Yep. The education cost share, on almost the last day of the year, December 30th, the state announced that they're going to be reducing current year ECS numbers. This ends up being important because you may have seen when we look at the governor's budget, his proposed cut to ECS compares to this new number, not what we budgeted for the year before. So that's one of the ways, and there were multiple, where the governor's calculated impact to us was actually different than what our actual budget-to-budget impact would be. So as you'd see in the current fiscal year, we're now projecting that to be the $6,087,000, or a cut of about $145,000 in the current year. On the more positive side, conveyance tax revenue is up by about $72,000, or projected to be up through the end of the year by about $72,000. The municipal revenue sharing funding, which we've discussed before back in August, this is the piece of the car tax reimbursement split with the fire district. So we see a positive variance there of $185,000 that happened after we had passed our budget. And then again, property taxes, I'm still hoping to get a more solid projection on this number going forward, but we should be just under $500,000 favorable on property taxes. That's of course due to the collection rate assumption. As I've met with our tax collector, we're tracking favorably, just ahead of last year, so keeping that projection on track as it was last year. So not included in that table, but in the news at the same time as the other cut was a freeze on LoCIP. This is something I can get into a little more with the governor's budget when we start talking about that, but they froze applications for reimbursement through LoCIP. This is something the town uses for road paving. It's part of the various revenue sources we use for the road paving program. They froze it for fiscal 17, but interestingly, the governor's budget, they appropriate about $30 million a year for this. What he's actually proposing is a freeze in fiscal 17, but then fiscal 18 and 19, what we're seeing in the proposed budget, is $90 million over those 2 years. So ultimately making up for what we lost in 17, but just sort of delaying the impact, if that makes sense. So we'll see if that pans out as the governor's budget moves forward. But ultimately, if you looked at a full 3-year picture, we would be having the same amount of entitlement on the LoCIP side as we had originally budgeted. On the expenditure side, on the Board of Selectmen side, we're tracking largely on budget. We're monitoring some key areas as I outlined on the let's see, top of page 3. In the general government, we have again, well, you'll see the general government seems to be tracking ahead. That's due to large pension payments that are made at the beginning of the year and a few other early expenses. Their general government will certainly be on track by the end of the year. Public Works budget, the street light purchase did not go through. The closing was delayed, and the closing was finally completed in November, and so those are, I think, scheduled to be relamped soon. As soon as they're relamped, that's when we'll start seeing the energy savings. So we're anticipating going over on that budget because we had anticipated this all being done at the end of, closer to the fall.
The cost came in line, but the savings didn't start as soon as we had.
If anything, the rate of savings appears to be even ahead of what we were originally budgeting, but due to the fact that the poles, I think still as of now, are not relamped.
What's the delay on that?
What's that?
Why the delay on the?
I know there were some issues with the closing. I'm not sure if either Bob or Lisa could weigh in on more on that. I know that Tom Roy had indicated there were some delays on Eversource's side with.
So should we be able to recoup something?
Yeah, again, I'm not an expert on what exactly happened, but I could defer, I don't know, Lisa, if you know more about why the delay happened.
So we will reach out to them to recoup on that. As you know, they have not been an easy partner in this. So we'll do what we can. I'm not optimistic. I don't like to say that publicly, but we'll be looking into it. Bob helped us with the contract and looked at that. I don't know, Bob, is there anything you want to add to that? No.
But that seems, I mean, they can be responsible for the delay in relamping, so we can't get the cost savings, which is the whole reason for going ahead with the purchase to begin with, and there's nothing we can do?
Well, we're going to try. I'm not going to say, yeah, we'll absolutely look into it.
No, I know you're trying, but just,
I mean, their view would be that we'll get the savings eventually, so. Yeah. I hear you. We'll do what we can do.
Right.
and I just have a question, Sean, you said the savings were tracking on target, but how can we have savings if we have?
Well, what we get, there's a consultant that works with us on the estimated savings, and the final numbers that I saw when Tom Roy was forwarding, as we're planning fiscal 18's budget number, because certainly they should be relamped before fiscal 18, that number came in better than our initial estimates of what the savings were going to be from the LED transfer.
We don't have any
So
savings.
prospective.
If not, right,
Had we
prospective
had
savings.
some, It would have been great.
Exactly. I'm sort of living in fiscal 18 already as we plan the budget, so in my head, we realized.
It's like a catch-up.
Chickens
Yes.
before they
The
hatch.
return should be the
Our
same.
kilowatt hour here. Okay?
And lastly, on the benefits line, just another one we're monitoring closely. We've seen enrollment changes and an increased amount that we need to pre-fund the HSA savings accounts as we've moved more employees into the HSA fund insurance plans. So we're seeing, that's another area where we're monitoring. We may see overages in the health insurance line, but we're again monitoring that very closely as we go forward. And that's pretty much it. I just had a summary on here of prior supplemental appropriations that we've discussed. You may recall from back in the early fall, the Board of Selectmen recommended a supplemental appropriation for the Gladney v. Simsbury. I'm going to put that as a recurring piece on the Finance Director's report, just so we remember that we still need to make that action on the Board of Finance side. I know at the time Barb wanted to wait until we were more into the spring, and we had a clearer picture of how the budget was progressing.
So in order to vote on that, I think we need to put it on a future agenda.
Yeah, we can do that, right. And I'll work with Rob to sort of schedule that once we're ready to put that on the agenda for supplemental appropriations.
Okay. Questions for Sean on the quarterly review? Okay, so let's move to amend the agenda to pull forward items 6 and 7. Need a motion for that.
So moved.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
So we've asked Bob DiCrescenzo to be here tonight. Obviously, things, a lot of press and major concerns around Governor Malloy's proposed budget, well in advance, of course, of any response from the actual legislature, what they might do. But I think the question for your help is to understand sort of what the legislative timeline is for the budget, what our statutory timelines are for the meetings and budgets that we need to do, and how much flexibility and contingency might we need to build into our calendar. So,
One thing I won't be able to tell you is what the legislature
oh,
said.
well, darn it. This will be a short meeting then.
Let me start by saying the state revenues are just that, they're state revenues. And nothing the state is doing changes your job under the charter. And revenues at this point in the fiscal year, the coming fiscal year, are always estimates, but they've been far more predictable, although last few years they've been less and less predictable, but nothing like this year, where you've got, the total elimination of ECS for towns like Simsbury on the one hand. On the other hand, the shifting of the cost of teacher retirement to the town, which the combination of those two is a very, very big number. The ameliorating tax on hospitals, or potential tax on hospitals, really does nothing for Simsbury, because there's no facilities here that could be taxed, although I guess there's a very small
Urgent care.
facility, urgent care. So you're really caught in a bind, because the numbers that I'm sure Sean shared with you, you probably told them to go back and check those figures once again, because it paints a very, very bleak picture when you go year to year, meaning fiscal 2017 to fiscal 2018. You've got a very, very big hole to fill. And if you translate that into mill rate increase, or percentage increase, mill rate increase is really what matters to people. It's a very big number. So if I were in your seat, I would do that, because that's the number you have today. Governor's proposed budget's the number you had today. But I would do it just to, I consider it, and I don't have any access to any information, you all don't, but I consider that to be worst-case scenario. I can't imagine the legislature doing more than that, and, you know, you've been in the legislature, so you know that process much better than I do. And I would suggest that, you know, what the legislature is going to be waiting for, and I've heard this on radio talk shows from a number of them, is, well, when we get the April 15th numbers from the income tax, we'll have a much better picture as to what they need to do. So, do you happen to know when the Appropriations Committee reports out its budget? Third week of April or thereabouts. I would wait for that and then revisit your worst-case scenario. Now, in terms of the charter,
Although I'll interject that whatever the approps and Finance Committee come out with, it all boils down in the last 2 days of the legislature.
Yes, it does.
to 6 people in a room. It's
Yes.
the governor and his guy, and then
the
Senate
reason I
Pro
say
Tem.
the Finance and Appropriation Committee report, because at least that's better information than current, and you know what direction they're going to go in. And if I had to guess, and this is just a guess, I think they're going to do something with a regional sales tax, allowing towns another source of revenue. It doesn't stand to reason that the legislature would do the full amount of the shift of the teacher retirement to towns in 1 year, because it's such a big number. But that's just a guess, but those committees reporting out will at least give you an indication of what direction the wind is blowing. And
I
also,
would agree.
there'll be a governor's reaction to that. If he says, look, line in the sand on teachers' retirement, that's also important information for you to know. What's most important, though, is the charter. I don't think it was the last charter change, or the charter before that, gave you some relief in terms of your mandatory deadlines. And the way I look at it is, how late can you get a tax bill out? And keeping in mind that you have to send out tax bills. You have to adopt a budget. You have to send the budget to referendum. If that budget fails at referendum, which it may this year, you never know, then there's procedures for that. But you can't not pass a budget and send it to referendum. Not allowed under the charter. So how late can you have the automatic referendum? And that really is a function of how late can you give the mill rate to the tax department and send out a tax bill. And if you say the tax bills have to be out at least 1 week before the end of the fiscal year, that puts you at June 23rd. And if you say the information has to get to the tax collector, what?
To equality about a week before. We had come up with, we've had a
We
dry
did
run
this
of this
last
last year.
Right.
Yeah, right.
With just about June 15th, of course, it depends on the year where that's falling. You know, the way I looked at it, I think, if I recall, June 13th is a Tuesday. And we've historically had referenda on a Tuesday. That June 13th seems to be the latest day we could still turn around and file with equality.
So let's use that as a number, June 13th automatic referendum. Charter says no less than 14, no more than 21 days notice of the automatic referendum. So 14 days, June 13th minus 14th is May 30th. Charter also says 5 days, published 5 days prior to automatic referendum. So back up another 5 days, and that gets us to May 25th. You got to give the newspapers 2 days. Send them the file, maybe they can do it in one.
We've
We don't
typically
do the
sent them a
newspaper anymore,
placeholder
right?
file ahead of time, and then they have to change the numbers.
Didn't we get rid of the newspaper notice?
You got to
It
publish
doesn't go
something.
into effect until December
Oh, yeah,
of
that's
this year.
right, the next one.
That was the charter change. The dates in the charter change were effective December.
So let's call it May 19th, May 18th and 19th, the last day when you can act.
That we can what?
The last day when you can have a meeting to adopt the budget and file it with the town clerk, et cetera. So between now and May 19th, you're going to have to gather the best information you can get, and you have to err on the side of worst-case scenario. I mean, because if you make a mistake on the downside, meaning that you've estimated more revenue than you're actually going to get, then you've got, luckily you've got fund balance that could correct that, but you don't want to do that. Your stewardship obligation is to pass a budget that covers the expenses for the coming year, so you're going to have to err on the
Right.
upside, if that makes any
Well,
sense.
I think that's open to debate.
It is.
Because you don't want to
Absolutely
err on
is.
the side of
Overtaxing.
overtaxing everybody and then having people furious at you because you've either cut their budgets to smithereens or you've raised their taxes 7% and then go, oh, never mind.
What you could do.
Supplemental
that's
tax
why we
bills
have
or-
reserves.
No, you don't want to do supplemental tax bills.
No. But
What
we
you
do
could
have
do is
healthy
you do
reserves.
contribution from fund balance. You could take your worst case scenario, and budget a contribution from fund balance that brings it up to a mill rate that you would find optimal, given all the facts and circumstances. And then if the news gets better, then you just don't take the contribution from fund balance, you get it in the general levy rather than taking it out of fund balance. That's probably a prudent way to go,
Okay.
given what you're up against. You just can't do that year to year, as you know.
Right, of course,
We
of
have
course.
enough anyway in the fund balance. Were we at?
Well, what's 1 mil worth? About $2 million? $2 million? So, you're gonna come up with a mill rate that's based on the best information you have. And then $2 million per 1 mil. That gives
It's
you-
right, last time I saw it was like the
parameters to
12th.
work with, but, and if it's any kind of,
So it's the 13th.
makes you feel better,
Right.
I got a call from another town today
Right.
going over the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Every town in the state is going through this. Now, I heard on the radio, the legislators talking about, well, we'll pass a law that allows you to have a referendum after the fiscal year. How on earth are you gonna do that? You've gotta publish a budget, you've gotta adopt a budget before the end of the fiscal year. That's not a practical solution. I mean, I understand the
That's
legislature.
treating the symptom, not the problem.
Yeah, the legislature can do lots of things to help you with your timelines, but still, a tax bill has to go out by the end of the fiscal year, before the end of the fiscal year. I mean, that's, bottom line, that's the deadline you cannot move.
So I would just add one commentary, having been in the legislature, and that is that particularly now that the legislature is more closely divided, especially in the Senate, it doesn't take too many people to be opposed to going home with a bad news story to kill the governor's budget. Now, I mean, they've got to come up with the money somehow, and they've got to make cuts somewhere. Obviously, they've got a big issue to deal with, but the notion of sort of pouring a lot more money from the suburbs and rural areas into the urban areas, which is what is being proposed, it is only going to be supported by the urban legislators, because all of the rest of the legislators have to go home and say, oh, guess what, we're taxing you more so we can send it elsewhere, and that's just not something that too many of them want to do.
And given that it's
So-
fundamentally a suburban legislature.
And there's a lot more, suburban and rural towns than there are urban. So I think that there will be significant changes. It's still going to be an ugly outcome, and we're not going to come out even, but I don't think it's going to be as bad as what the governor's.
If I had to guess, I'd say about a third to a half of what you're doing right now.
Yeah.
And I don't know how they're gonna get there, I just think they are somehow. One of the things they could do, and it's pure speculation on my part, but it has been talked about, instead of a hospital tax, you have a nonprofit tax, which extends to facilities you do have here. None of this is good, none of this is something anybody wants to do, but in terms of what you need to do, you need the best numbers you can get to meet your deadlines, and then you're just gonna have to pass the best budget you can come up with, given those numbers.
We'll have to use, work with the tools we have. This idea of a regional sales tax is so new and different that it'd be hard to build a model around that until
So you know what it is.
they actually put it on paper.
Right.
And-
Numbers are pretty big, though. It's
Can't remember.
$300 million per 1% statewide. That takes care of 3/4 of your teacher retirement.
It wouldn't be evenly distributed, though, I would suspect, right?
Nothing
No,
is.
well, you do have some car dealerships here, which helps, because that's the big money. The big money's in car dealerships. But again, it's all speculation. And then, CCM will give you a report if there were a regional sales tax at 1% or 0.5%, this is what it'll be to you. And, from today until end of April, you'll probably get more and better information to plug into your revenue estimate.
Yeah. Are there other aspects of the governor's budget that you would want to make sure we think about, Bob? I mean, this idea of pushing back this one large expense certainly was innovative on his part, but
Yeah, I just, we've all witnessed the Connecticut legislature for a very long time, and I've never seen them do such a big step in 1 year. If anything, the typical thing is let's appoint a study commission and they'll report back next year after the elections, and that sort of thing happens a lot. Don't know if they have the luxury of being able to do that this year, but I would find it very surprising if they were to make the full shift in 1 year. But again, you can't count on me saying I find it very surprising. You need a number to put in your budget, and I think the best you're going to do is wait till after 15th and wait for the committees to report and go from there. But I do think, what?
Add one other little piece of insight from a staffer friend of mine there, that some of this came about because Ben Barnes and folks in OPM realized that the towns, of course they see it differently, that the towns have big reserves compared to what the state has. We've actually done our job the way we
Right.
were supposed to, and the state hasn't. And they think that we're over-reserved. They obviously haven't talked to S&P or anybody else, but they think, wow, look at that, there are all these pots of money out there in the towns. And those guys are flush, let's go get why do you rob a bank? Because that's where the money is.
Exactly what
So I think it's really important to, have everybody try to educate whoever they can up in the legislature that, having reserves is an appropriate thing to do. It's
Right.
unfortunate they haven't followed the same rules, but, we shouldn't be punished for having been good stewards of the financial situation in our towns.
Well, you can't let their approach to financial management, we'll call it, drag you down to their level
Right.
of
Well,
financial
That's
management.
what they're trying to do.
all right.
But the bottom line is, no matter what they do, you have
We
the
have
job
to be
do under
ready.
the charter,
We have
and
to
you've
do
got
our
to do
job.
it, and that's all there is to it. I wish I had something more positive to tell you here tonight, but that's about it.
All right, thank you, Bob. Anybody else? Great. All right, so, thank you. The next item would be to discuss the proposed capital projects. And the reason I put this on the agenda is that Burke and I think Matt was here when we presented the junior high project, and I wanted to be sure that we also had the latest thinking on the senior center. We haven't seen the budgets from either the town or the Board of Selectmen yet, so we don't know exactly what they're going to finally recommend. But it would, maybe each of you could just give us a sense of where you think those are going to be, and then we can just speak briefly about the bonding or inclusion of those. And again, this is premature because we're not here to make any decisions tonight, but I think as we look at the budgets that you're going to present, having a sense of state of play on those two large projects would be helpful. So maybe, Lisa, you could start with the senior center and current thinking, sort of state of play. And
Well, thanks for having me in. It'll be a fun ride with y'all, so looking forward to spending lots of time with you. So where we are is the Board of Selectmen has not taken a vote on the final project, so I'm going to present it as part of my budget presentation on Monday. we will have department head discussions and capital discussions on March 4th. And I do anticipate a vote either March 4th or the following week, where we've got budget workshops scheduled. But where we left it last is in October, I presented sort of a summary of where we are, and I'd given you a summary document back then, which I've given you another copy, as well, laying out some of the options we have and incorporating some of your feedback. Although you didn't take a vote on it, there was at least an indication that perhaps you were thinking more along the $5 million mark for the senior center. So we tried to incorporate those concepts into some options for the Board of Selectmen. And the Board of Selectmen at that point did ask that I and my staff and town engineer pursue an option at Eno Memorial Hall at the $5 million range. And so you have in your packet some architectural renderings of possible options there from 5 going down. And in my presentation to you, part of making Eno work is there has to be a relocation of SCTV. So my recommendation will, of course I'm still working on it, Sean dreads seeing me in his office, but I think it will likely, you will see something in the $5 million-ish range for the senior center and some additional costs, and it could be up to $1 million in relocation of SCTV if we do an add-on with Henry James, which the Board of Education has been working with us on. We hope to get that number down because we did make our charge to the building committee to look at other options to see if there are less expensive options out there. But we probably will not have that totally completed by the time we pass the budget on that. So we want, again, to Bob's point, budgeting for the worst case. We did take, although again you guys didn't take a vote on it, we did take very seriously your inclination to go with the 6-7% bond rate. And I had a conversation with Rob to confirm that that was the direction he wanted us to go on. So my budget will present very close 6-7 debt service ratio, so that you can do that. And I would like to give a lot of credit to the Board of Education, who we worked very, very closely with to move projects out. We eliminated, you'll see my recommendations, probably 15 to 17 million eliminated or moved out on the capital side. So we're trying to work, we don't have a lot of flexibility in our operating budget, but where we had some flexibility is in capital. And so really appreciate the Board of Education working with us on that. And I think we came up with a capital project that both of us are going to be comfortable with, but I'll let Matt speak to his project. I think that is in the best interest of the town. But again, it hasn't been presented to my board,
Right.
So they may say, no, we don't want to do this, or they may have a change in there. And then you may have a change, but that's where we are right now.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then maybe, Burke, you could do the same relative to the impact of SCTV and what your current thinking is.
Well, since Brian White and I worked on that presentation of the Henry James Phase 3 project, we did work with Castle Booz, the architects, and a professional cost estimator. It did come back for the same budgeted amount of $22,825,000. The auditorium size, as well as the library media center square footage, stayed the same. The seating for the auditorium is 400 seats, so that's a little bit smaller. But that's a quick update there. In terms of the charter for the Board of Education, the capital budget had to be moved forward to the Board of Selectmen by the 15th of this past month. So the two projects that are in the first year of that CIP are the Henry James Phase 3 and the tennis court replacement at Simsbury High School. So it's essentially the same. We've been working on the state grant reimbursement estimates in the schedule for Phase 3. I actually did receive an estimate at the very end of the day today, and it's definitely favorable. As I had mentioned to you all, I had used a very conservative number, so we will be able to update you a bit on that.
The governor's budget does not propose any impact to the state reimbursement.
I have not seen, in fact, the approved numbers from the Bureau of Grants Management actually has us with a higher percentage for the for the 16-17 year than the 15-16 year. So believe it or not, we'd have a higher reimbursement percentage for Phase 3, which would need to be submitted, the grant application, by the end of June of this current year, 16-17.
And I seem to recall when we met on this in December, that's when you presented, wasn't it, December 20th? Yeah.
Yep.
That there was still some question about which of the costs would be eligible for state reimbursement. So with the architects in fine tuning that, you were able to get to the point where you could get this estimate that you were referring to today?
So we've been kind of working on this parallel Phase 2 and Phase 3. So since we last met, we got the state approval and the local approval to go out to bid. The bid was actually advertised yesterday for Phase 2, and we met and got a very clear indication of what costs were ineligible in Phase 2. So I gave Sean that estimate today, and that was slightly higher than what we had used before. Again, trying to be conservative there. So for Phase 3, we have the project budget, and we have the offset that they have to calculate for square footage. So based on your school population and your square footage, that number was calculated by the architects, which affects reimbursement. And then they gave me an estimate of what of that $22.8 million project would likely be not eligible. So I'm just going to run those numbers, but it'll be a little bit higher reimbursement than what is on our schedule.
All right.
So until we actually, have a project, we don't get to that level of them saying, yes, this is exactly what your, reimbursement would be.
And the current thinking, or at least the primary option today, would be the SCTV as part of this, but with perhaps options to do something else.
That's the direction we had from the Board of Selectmen until I hear otherwise of another option, but they are actively exploring other options. So we are, and the building committee is working on it as well as, and town staff.
Okay.
So the architect's rendering still shows the potential for that SCTV to be part of Henry James. It doesn't, it's really up to the town to determine whether or not it wants to pursue that.
Okay. Then I guess the last question would be, is there, not that we're asking for a line item veto, but is there pricing for the various components, be direct, for the auditorium as part of that versus the other, if we get in a position where that would make a difference?
I think the short answer is we have a price that includes the auditorium, and the cost estimating firm has details on that, but we don't have a price with and a price without.
I thought last time, I'm sorry, I forget the principal's name, but I thought he said it was about $5 million for the...
Yeah, that was actually my estimate based on the first iteration of the architect's cost estimate, and it was in that $4.5 to $5 million range. And I don't think it's far off from that still, but we don't have a new breakout because that's not what the project is. The project is including that.
All right.
I just have one quick question. So the Phase 3 $22.8 million would include what we're talking about for SCTV.
It is not part of the budget. It's never been part of the budget. It was part of the design just to show that it could be going there, and Lisa chose to have that as its own conversation with its own cost estimate and square footage.
What I'm going to propose to my board is that the senior center project be the $5 million plus the additional cost to relocate SCTV. Because the question is, where do you put SCTV? Do you put it in the education budget, or do you put it in the town budget? And the reason why I'm doing that is because we're looking at other options. So the description will be senior center and the costs of relocating SCTV, so that if we find a better, cheaper place, it's all packaged together. So that's why I'm proposing to do that.
And
The one,
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, and you estimated that relocation cost at about $1 million?
So to do SCTV at Henry James would be about $1 million. So we figure that's the high end. There are some other, if we renovate some existing spaces, if we can find an existing space, and if we can bond for it if it's not in town property.
But that's purely relocation as opposed to new equipment and setup at the new facility, wherever it may be.
We're still nailing down those costs, but that was the intention, yes?
Yeah, thanks.
Just for moving the equipment and what have you from one place to another, we're looking at $1 million?
No, it would be the building to
The
accommodate.
building as well.
Yeah,
That's what
no,
Derek
no, no.
asked.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's not that expensive to move it.
Well, I just didn't know
Right.
labor to reset up the, basically.
Yeah,
the
there
same
is some
format. I mean, I know
relocation
that-
costs, and I think we're
Yeah.
still nailing that down, and we'll have a better number for you on that, but that was the intent, was to hold them harmless, to view as, we view, my board has given that indication, although we haven't taken a vote, so I just want to be cautious on that. That there is a value to SCTV and transparency of government. We feel that it's an important partner with our town. But we are looking at the numbers, and that will be a decision point for all boards to consider it.
Okay. And Burke, just my question for you was then if the $1 million or whatever the build-out costs were, if that was incorporated into your budget, some of that would in fact be dual space, so that would be eligible as well for reimbursement?
If it was ultimately added to the project, it is doubtful that it would be reimbursable. There really has to be a clear indication that it's part of the instructional program.
And that would be one of the reasons for moving it to Henry James, correct? So that it would become more integral to the education.
It's something that can be worked out, but there's just no way of knowing whether it's going to be reimbursable or not. I mean, if it's going to be located there, it needs some of its own separate entrances and some of its own autonomy, and there definitely is a clear concept that yes, we would see a level of synergy where you could have students, hopefully learning and being able to volunteer, but the state grant program is very stringent on determining ineligible spaces. You can't put offices in. They will never reimburse for central office costs. So to really say it's a true instructional space would be a harder case. We wouldn't want to set up the expectation that that would be easy. Potential for some, but I really wouldn't want to bank on it.
So our job will be, as these budgets are presented, is to look at these capital projects, make contingency plans for the support that we would see from the state, recognizing the environment they're in, and then look at what we would feel comfortable, suggesting. We'll assign a debt structure and tax impact or reserve impact on the capital budgets as presented. And so, that will take into account the timing of the projects, as we always do, the length of bonding for certain projects, and the cap of 6.7%. All right? Thank you for bringing that up. I think it's helpful because certainly on the senior center, the project has had different lives and may yet. Okay, great. Other questions for Heather? I think this was helpful for us as we start to think about what we're going to have to do in fairly rapid order here in March, April, and May. All right, next item is moving down to 8, which is the high school solar project approval and Board of Ed use of non-lapsing account. Burke, walk us through what we have done, should have done, what we need to do.
For the late transmission of this, what I sort of did here is tried to kill two birds with one stone. I have an update for you on some of our spend to save projects that relate to energy usage. And on the last page, I have the update on the solar project, and in bold a little bit of what the review from our last time in terms of back in December. You may recall the actions that were taken to help move this project forward. So this memo just highlights some of the things that we've talked about previously. We're very, very close. We expect in the next week or so to hear about the delivery of our propane buses, our first pilot program there, and we also have a fuel source that is being installed at the Salters Yard for that. Some of the energy efficiency projects in our schools. Just in the past summer, we had conversion to gas at Squadron Line and also at Tooten Hills. So we're going to be able to, in another month or so, kind of see what that first year was like as compared with oil for both of those schools. And we were able to get utility company incentives for doing those improvements. Those are based on the squadron boiler project, which was a capital project from several years prior that was funded, and that's actually going to allow us to move forward with energy improvements at Terriffill School, which is where we really need to work next. So we see that we're estimating that with the completion of that work next year, we could see approximately $14,000 of electricity savings based on work that's scheduled to be done there by the end of summer. And then ultimately, with the same company that we used back in 2015, when we first started energy efficiency programs in real large scale at the high school, Tooten Hills and Henry James, they have some proposals for us at Central and Latimer schools that we're going to keep looking at. At the top of the second page, you just made a quick reference to, we had been looking at switching gears. This one is kind of out of context with these others. We had looked at companies that we know have worked with other school districts on printer management in our schools, and we really didn't. After several meetings with that, we didn't really see something that was going to have an immediate payback. Really, the goal is to try to get rid of the inexpensive inkjet printers that cost a lot to operate through toner and cartridges, and try to, pay for more laser printers, which ultimately have a lower operating cost. So you don't get this bang for the buck right up front. But I just wanted to report back on that. So.
On the energy projects, Burke,
Yes.
Is there capital that we put out up front, or is this a shared savings where they help fund the conversion?
So the Squadron Line boiler was a capital project, and that included both total replacement of the heating boilers, but also we were able to replace the hot water boilers also. So that yielded energy incentives from the two utility companies, which we were then able to say, all right, that would be our contribution to do work at Terriffill. So there's no upfront cost at all. There's no out-of-pocket cost. So that is something that, as we get into the details of the upcoming budget, we're going to see whether or not that can actually move the line item budget for electricity down. But we're also looking at estimated impacts of some of the air conditioning projects, and just kind of looking at how we're doing this winter. So we expect to talk about that further. And in terms of Central and Latimer, those would not be capital projects. I think we would most likely, if we're going to be able to proceed with those, it would be the so-called on-bill financing that the town has taken advantage of in some of their buildings.
So on the utility company incentives, the way that works is that you earn incentives and then you can apply those toward other projects.
Right.
That
Right.
Decrease the costs.
Right. So basically, in the
Like a
case of the
parlay bet.
in the case of the Terriffill School, there was
Parlay
like a
bet.
3-year return, and the cost in real rough numbers, it was like $90,000 worth of work to yield a payback in about three years. And the electricity and the gas company would pay roughly half of that, and our share would be that other half. In this case, we were able to then take what had been earned from Squadron Line and put it towards that, so there's no out-of-pocket.
Well played.
Nice job.
So that is something that we
Take
will
your winnings.
be able to look at. It will truly be a savings for next year. It's just a question of what does that really net out to, given what else is going on the utility world.
Okay, questions about these?
So
Do we
that-
need to take action on the last one?
So this brings us to the solar project. So at your December 20th meeting, along with the Board of Selectmen actions that happened in December, we created one project accepting the grant monies from the Connecticut Green Bank of $40,500. And you all voted to create a supplemental appropriation in total of $57,074 to allow the grant plus the Board of Ed share to be paid for from one project that's going to be tracked by Sean's office. And so ultimately, we had always been planning back in 2015 when we first started doing this, the $390,000 of non-lapsing monies was allowed to be put in to the non-lapsing account for energy efficiency projects. We spent just about $372,000 of that, and so this balance is what we would like formally per the policy, which I have copies of, saying that you authorize the expenditures out of. You vote to put it in as well as to expend it out. So this, based on the fact that we now have Millennium Builders is the vendor that had been selected, we just want to have that formal confirmation of up to $17,598. The up to amount is because, there's about $1,000 there. If we have any change orders, we'll be covered, and anything that's not spent will flow right back into the general fund. So that is the action that we would request. And I think that's to make our accountants happy, right, Sean?
That's right.
Meaning our two CPAs that we fortunately have working for us.
So what would the motion actually be? To approve?
Basically just to authorize the expenditure of up to $17,598 from the non-lapsing funds to pay for the vendor for the SHS Solar.
Okay, so someone will move what Burke just said. So moved.
Second.
Seconded. All right, and all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. So Pam, you got that?
That'll make Deb happy.
All right, great.
All right.
Bert,
All right.
before you go ahead, one question back on the buses, and maybe I
Yes.
missed it, but it says cost would decrease by more than 1,000 per bus. Is that per year?
That is the estimated, I mean, there were national,
I mean, we spend
There
more
were
than
national-
$1,000 of repairs on each bus every year?
well, it's built into our rates, okay? So we pay Salters to not only operate, but to maintain our buses. So ultimately,
Dollars a year?
the national industry numbers on propane buses have shown more than $1,000. I think I've
Per
seen
year?
figures per year per bus, and
Wow, I had no idea the maintenance costs on a bus were so high.
decreased maintenance.
Is it-
But we're not making any assumptions. We're going to, working with Salters, we're going to be able to see, what is in fact the experience.
Yeah.
And it's a lot harder to talk about fuel savings. I mean, as I said in my last update on this to you back in the fall, this isn't necessarily all about the financial aspect. You have a quieter, cleaner, bus system, and you may well have, a better cost of propane fuel, but then, in some years you might have a diesel that happens to be better. So it's not always going to be cheaper
Right.
just because you're going to propane.
I don't doubt that there'll be savings. I don't know. I drive a car a lot more miles, and I know it's a car, not a bus, but a lot more miles than a bus, a lot more days of the year, a lot longer distances, and I don't think I spend $1,000 a year on my car, so I was sort of floored that.
What kind of car is that? I want one. Yeah, make that too.
Burke, are these retrofitted existing buses or? are they
No,
brand new buses?
these are brand new.
Okay.
These are brand new buses. Yep.
How long do we keep our buses for? How many
Quite a
years
long
are they in
time.
service? Maybe that's right. 'cause
So
if they're
we're
in-
playing
yeah.
some catch up. We made sure that we were really serious about trying this out, and a pilot seemed to be a minimum number seemed to be 5 or 6. We still have the potential to purchase one more from this current bid, but we average sort of an 8 to 10 year lifespan.
Oh,
Are they all diesels otherwise?
They are currently all diesels. These would be our first propane vessels. Yeah.
Okay, so conversions really aren't appropriate?
I've not seen them as recommended options.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we're retiring our older fleet buses as these come on board.
Yes, yes, and we have approximately 30 town-owned buses, so we've got to keep turning that over, and that's why our CNR budget tries to do about 2 to 3 per year.
A year.
All right, thank you, Burke. All right, next agenda item is the, just a brief discussion on the audit, the CAFR, which stands for?
Comprehensive Annual Financial Report.
Excellent.
Gold star, you guys. See you soon.
All right.
Appreciate it.
So we had endeavored to have the auditor, accountant, manager from, what firm? Huh? Bloom Shapiro, yes, excuse me, I knew that. But unfortunately, when we rescheduled the first time and then canceled, we lost that opportunity. She was not available tonight. I'm not sure what kinds of questions. She would have just gone through the report. I think the letters that they sent relative to the process. Again, I think kudos to Sean and his staff. I think, for the expenses that for the staff we have, we do a very good job of buttoning this down. And if there's any question about how complicated it is, just look at how many different funds there are, and we keep track of a lot of things moving in and out. But I don't really have anything other than that to say. Do we need to accept this report? It's already, it's done, right?
Right.
So, anyone have any questions or comments on it?
I feel like that annoying student in class who always has questions for the teacher. But I do have a couple of comments and questions if we have time for it. Okay, on page Roman numeral 6, and this is just a quick comment, but they talk about in the first paragraph, the diversity of the town's grand list. I would not characterize it as diverse at all. They interpret that because the 10 largest taxpayers only account for 7.5% of the.
By their definition,
yeah.
that would be diverse.
Yeah, except it's because all the rest of it is residential, which is not really diverse. We don't have a diverse business base, but I don't see that as a strength. I see that as a problem in the town, that we don't have enough business base in this town. So I just wondered if
It's a two-edged sword, though.
Yeah.
When your biggest tenant moves out and you lose $1.5 million
Yep.
of tax,
And
you
when
would
it's
be
all in
better
one.
off, right?
Yeah.
So,
If we had more businesses, we'd be better. On page 41, I know we've mentioned this before, but this is this long list of town projects that are over 10 years old, some of
Yeah,
them, that have
that's a
still
big
not been closed.
that's a good comment. Yes.
That's something I really think we gotta
Yeah.
get rid of, because there's all these little dribs and drabs of money sitting there that should revert or something into the general fund, and can we make that happen?
Absolutely, yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree. I think, absolutely. I think this is something I'm going to try to pull together a list for perhaps, I'm not sure when we'll be moving this budget through, but it sounds like after what Bob was saying, there may be a scenario where the April or May meeting have some time where we can go through these, discuss them, and then take the formal action to close them out.
I would suggest that we try to have a plan to do these. That's a very good catch, Linda, because it costs us money for them to look through all of these every year. That maybe by the September meeting, we could have a plan of action for that, and I'll work with Sean on that.
And I think something that Jeff and I, when we worked on the last policy we adopted, I think we put language in there to say, for future capital projects, if you haven't spent the money
Has to be a
within
sunset-
X number
sunset
of years,
period for
it
it,
goes
yeah.
back, because
Yeah.
this is a problem.
Yeah.
Right.
And the last thing was a question on page 70. I may be just remembering wrong. I'm sure I am, but I thought we had dumped a few $1 million into pensions when we had some extra that was supposed to be booked in 2016, am I?
There was a true-up.
In 2015?
Was it all in 2015? I thought there was some in 2016 too.
Pensions or for OPEB? Because the $3 million
Well,
went into
let's
the
see, what
OPEB
is this
fund.
on? I looked at this for a month ago, so I probably forget. This is pension, right? This page.
OPEB's is part of that, though.
Yep. I'm
It's on a
forgetting.
different schedule. I mean, it says, now you're looking about in 2016?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you got it right, but I just thought,
Well, yeah, you can see there in 2016, we contributed an extra $135,000. Is
oh,
that what you're
that's
referring
it,
to?
huh?
Yeah, it's confusing the way they show that as a actuarial negative. You'll notice it says contribution deficiency.
Yeah.
So if it's the opposite of a deficiency, they call it an excess in parentheses.
Yeah, okay.
I love auditors, but it is a good thing to be negative there. It shows you've put in more.
Okay, all right, that's what it was, I didn't.
So I think that's the
Opposite of
135
what
there.
you'd normally see in a spreadsheet. All right,
Correct.
thanks, those were my quick comments.
A question on there was, in the Bloom Superior letter to the Board of Finances, an indication here that the town had seen an increase in uncollectibles, which struck me as odd, because I thought we had been trending, for the most part, even or exceeding prior year collectibles, so I didn't know, Sean, whether I wasn't sure what they were referring to.
You're talking about on page 2?
Page 2, it says, in analyzing the allowance consideration for given the impact of such factors, where was it? Yeah, so the town writes off tax receivables through the suspense process on an annual basis, and this amount has been increasing each year.
Yeah, I'll have to
What's-
get
yeah, I
back.
just
I know
wasn't sure.
we approved that suspends list, I think it was the May meeting every year, and my understanding is it's a relatively small number.
It's
that's
still
fallen
Very
off.
small,
yeah.
very small.
They may be saying that the increase from year to year was slightly higher, but as you said, we were usually at 99.98% collected by the time that we're writing off the suspends list. But I could talk to both our tax collector and our accountant to see. It may be just something the way we're posting it in the finance system that is not necessarily showing it the way that the auditors want to see it, but I can look into that and get back to you at the next meeting with kind of more on what that means.
And then the other question I had was on the capital asset reporting, and forgive me, this is just my ignorance of probably accounting terminology, but there was talk of there not being an indication of assets purchased with grant funds, and also that the accumulated depreciation didn't include depreciation from additions from the prior year, and I'm just curious whether either of those would have any positive budgetary impact if we were to correct those.
I don't think from a budgetary impact, I think it may have a net position impact on sort of where our overall financials are. This is the piece, I got to say, in doing this, going through this audit process, the capital asset reporting, which was just a complete bear. And part of the reason is we use an Excel file to track all of our capital assets on the town side, going back for years and years and years. There are companies I think you will see in the proposed budget, contracting with a company that helps do this for you, even comes out, barcodes actual equipment, tracks it for you. A host of things. It's actually the company the Board of Education uses on their side, who I've been in talks with, because I don't want to go through this capital asset reporting process again that I just went through in the fall. But there are confusing pieces of what we have in there, and I think that partly what they're highlighting, and I did encourage them to put a management point on capital assets, partly for some backup to hopefully get this through the budget process, but I recognize that this is an area we really can make some improvements on tracking, and again, it comes back to the larger issue, again, of just making sure that we're protecting the town's assets, keeping preventing fraud and all the other things that could potentially happen if you're not tracking your assets carefully. So we're just, that's something that we're really cognizant of, and you'll be hearing more about it in the budget process, our proposal.
Thank you.
Sure. All right, great, thank you. Sure. All right, so the next item is I have down here the discussion of the debt policy, but this really is our ongoing project to update the policies of the Board of Finance. I did take a pretty good look at the policies that are on the website, and I did this back around the December timeline. And they sort of fall into two categories. Some that are reasonably up to date, meaning they're 2 or 3 years old at the most. There are the second category, what I call investment policy statements. And so these are just like your personal wealth manager, or whoever, you create an investment policy statement about your tolerance for risk and where you want to, your time horizon, all the rest of that. Those policies actually are the responsibility of the funds for whom they are stating the policy. And so I talked to Tom Cook about that, and I think we're going to talk about it tomorrow at the pension subcommittee. So those should be coming, those should, if necessary, should be updated by them and make sure that they're current, and then we can have them on our website. But the one that was the most delinquent, or the oldest, is the debt policy, which is 1989. A couple of things have changed since then, relative. So what I'd like to do is make this the project, but recognizing how much work we're going to have to do, I would again set a target for September meeting to have this done. And I've asked for volunteers, and more have volunteered. So appreciate that.
My notes.
Well, that's great. We appreciate it. Thank you. All right.
Are you serious? Are you serious?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, just some other items that we should talk about. I think at the December meeting, we had talked about committee positions, and I'm on the pension subcommittee. I think, again, I'm not trying to cut anybody else. If somebody else would love to do these things, you're welcome to step up and volunteer. But I think Derek has volunteered to take that position, so we both will be at the meeting tomorrow. I'm still interested, stay in charge.
What time does that start?
7:30.
7:30.
No, is it?
It's upstairs, Board of Ed conference room.
It's AM.
And so just a not post-meeting, but a pre-meeting, the agenda item there is to discuss actively managing the OPEB assets, which have now gotten to be large enough that we could consider that. So that's the biggest item on that.
What's the
list.
amount?
$13 million.
The other committee is sort of, I'm not sure if it's a standing committee or ad hoc committee, but it's relative to the building planning committee for education.
What was that one?
Facilities and Enrollment Task
Facility
Force.
enrollment.
Thank you.
Oh, right.
Thank you.
Barbara was
I
on
never
that.
get that right. And again, I cannot attend, say the meeting's April 4th, right?
Sounds right.
And so I was looking for volunteers for that. And
Is it April 4th?
Kevin volunteered.
Great.
I was doing a good job on the volunteers. So how often do they meet, Burke?
That's really been, more or
Ad
less
hoc.
an annual one, sort of to check in recently.
Okay. All right.
Is that the task force that would evaluate, for example, whether to close a school, that kind of
Yes.
thing? Okay.
Impacts of long-term projects on planning and the like, right? Okay. One other item, we sort of missed the urgency of this by our January 19th meeting being canceled, but I think most people heard about what happened in Farmington relative to the hacking, where they lost how much, a couple $1 million was taken. Maybe somebody just give 2-minute on that.
Yes, the short version of what happened there, I did talk to the finance director in Farmington to get more details, but it was consistent with what you may have read in the paper. They fell victim to what was essentially an email scam
in that there are, especially called hackers or nefarious types that have discovered that they can impersonate, they'll do their homework and find out who, let's say a town is working with a large vendor on a large project. In this case, Farmington's doing their water pollution plant. It's like a $25 or $30 million project. And ultimately send an email saying, we know you've been paying by paper check before, but here's an email. It looks like the right email. It's got on the right letterhead. It's got recognizable names, and says, here's our new ACH information. Send the next payment via ACH. And so, it's something we had heard. We had been briefed about that type of scam by KERMA about 3 or 4 months ago. It's something that we're, actively watching. You may have seen also, though, as Bloom Shapiro is recommending to all their clients, a fraud risk assessment to be done. I think, again, to totally preview, but I think you'll see a proposal for that in the coming budget as well.
Well, that's sort of where I was going with this.
Right, and that might be something we even consider taking up prior to fiscal 18 as a supplemental appropriation, depending on the number and the
Would you
comfort
really
level.
change who you send checks to without some
Well, it's-
real confirmation from
I mean,
someone
they get,
you know?
I mean, I agree, we do, luckily we have, and I think I forwarded to the board sort of some of the steps that we take. I mean, they can be, yes, the short answer is if we ever came across this situation, first of all, we don't use ACH very much. If you were ever in that situation, we would call a known contact there and confirm that this is all legit. They do have clever things in the email saying, call this number if you have any questions, and of course, if you call that number, it's somebody on the scammer's side, right? It's not the main.
But yeah, you look back on something like this and you say, oh my God, how could that have happened?
Right, but it
the
does.
important thing is it does happen. Cybersecurity is a huge, huge thing. We shouldn't be naive about, we think we have covers, but I would be a strong proponent of spending the money for a cyber audit or a risk assessment or whatever, so.
So I do want to add that, we created the Technology Task Force, and one of their tasks is to look at cybersecurity, and they did complete a Bloom Shapiro analysis of some of our cybersecurity status and have made some recommendations, which, as Sean alluded to, you will see some in the budget recommendations. But that was done in conjunction with the Board of Education. So we were actually ahead of Farmington or some of the other towns in taking this, because we've been told it's not, is this going to happen, but when? And what can we do to reduce our risk? And also this, credit to Sean and Tom Cook in our office, who actually successfully advocated for some cybersecurity coverage for KERMA, which had never been given.
I was going to ask
before,
about
so-
insurance. Was Farmington covered for this?
So they, no, short version. And there are pieces of cybersecurity coverage that this exact attack would not have been
Right.
covered. Right? There are certain pieces in there that are restoration of people's private data or credit monitoring and different things that the plan. So you can get, and that's something we're pushing for, is even expanded coverage. But depending on the exact, who misplaced the money where, I think it's pretty clear that Farmington's not fully covered for this, that's for sure.
All right? Just a heads up on that. The last sort of other item I would say is that we probably should do a board meeting at some point. Do we have that on an agenda, or should we work around one of our meetings and do that? When's our next meeting? It's March.
So you've got a few in March. The ones we have scheduled, does anyone need a copy, by the way, of
Yes.
the calendar, the
Yeah,
last, it says draft at the top, this was the last version we had. And of course, as we know, various,
Things
as
might
we're
change.
discussing, things can change. This was what we had originally planned on.
Yeah.
And proposing,
Which draft do I have?
oh, I know. This one's a little, I think, more expensive. The version I gave you now has some of the Board of Selectmen steps, so you can ignore some of those pieces, but this gives you the full picture. But we had originally planned for well, again, in answer to your first question, the Board of Education has to present by March 15th, so they're presenting on March 14th, Tuesday night. The Board of Selectmen has to present by the end of the month, but we're anticipating and scheduling to present that early. I know last year there was some of the feedback was, if we don't, the charter says we got to give it to you on the 31st, and your first hearing must be by April 10th. It really only gives you about 5 days with the budget. Because this year, due to Passover and other factors, we have to have the hearing no later than April 6th, unless we want to have it on a Saturday or Sunday. So that's why you see, we're proposing Board of Selectmen to present on March 21st, and so far I see no reason that we won't be able to keep to that, presenting about 8 days earlier or so. So those are the March meetings, and then, again, you have to have at least one hearing by April 10th. That's the only piece in the charter that's very specific to the day. So we have to have the April 6th hearing kind of no matter what we end up doing. What we did last year was then conclude that hearing and establish a second hearing with a date certain. The reason you have to do that is because if you do not do that, the budget goes to the voters after 10 days from your last hearing. So as long as we've scheduled another hearing, we learned that last year, we're fine. So that's where we get into what Bob was talking about. If we're targeting in June 13th, we may at that point say, okay, we're going to have a second hearing May 25th or whatever the day is.
And what did we do last year? So at April 18th timeframe, did we have that hearing and then schedule another one?
Yeah.
Correct. We scheduled one for right before a Board of Finance hearing, a meeting, so it was like a 10-minute hearing. I think only one person talked.
I remember that. And then we had the real one on May.
Right, the one with
May
presentations, the hearing.
Yeah.
The one with presentations, the hearing at the high school.
Amphitheater. Yeah.
The amphitheater was the April 6th or 7th hearing. It was the second one that was
Abbreviated.
right. That's the one that needs to be noticed.
And we're proposing to do that same thing this time?
I think so. I mean, we can talk about. I suppose
I think that's appropriate. So the budgets have been published. The public can come.
Right. Give their feedback. I think that's probably the most practical way to go. And then the second hearing is, again, just to be in compliance with the charter and trigger the appropriate referendum date.
Okay. So maybe we should put the alternate dates that we discussed at the beginning of tonight's meeting on this and highlight them, because
So
they're
sort of
probably
working-
more real than not.
Working back from June 13th.
Will you email that to everybody then?
Sure. I'll send out a proposal for that. Absolutely.
And you can take off the dates that we've already passed. so-
Sure, of course.
All right. Okay.
So that buys us like
So-
an additional 2-3 weeks, doesn't it? Didn't we?
At least a month.
It's
I would
almost
say.
a month.
and
Almost a
half.
month, right?
Yeah, we said that the
May 19th was the latest date of
the May
adoption, right?
31st, the referendum would be on June 13th instead of May 9th.
Right.
And so,
Yeah, you'll notice even this proposal had a second hearing on April 18th. That was in order to trigger the May, otherwise the referendum had to
Right.
be at the end of April, and we've always historically had them in May, until recent history.
So the April dates then are not going to be set in stone, these dates that are on this draft?
Right, the one that, under the new proposal, the April 6th would be set, so you have to have the first by April 6th. The April 18th would be canceled. And in place of that would be, now, I think that's the regular,
that's our regular
that's your
meeting.
regular meeting anyway. I think that's the third Tuesday. So the April 18th would just be a regular Board of Finance meeting, and then you would we'll send out a proposal for the second and final hearing, working back from the June 13th referendum.
Yeah, so we'll have two sets of dates. If everything is hunky-dory, we would go ahead with April 18th and have the referendum on May 9th, and we'd be all done. Alternatively, we'll have the schedule that we discussed today, and we won't try to, it'll either be one or the other.
Right.
We'll know enough. It's not possible to do something in between those two. I think we need to plan our lives around two sets of dates. That's what I'm suggesting, right? Okay.
Right, and if the Appropriations Committee sort of surprises us with information sooner, but otherwise, that April 18th is probably right around when we're going to get their
So
information.
if you know that you have travel conflicts or not, we need quorums on these days, so, yeah. All right?
I do,
Okay.
on the first public hearing.
That's why we have 6 members. All right?
All right.
So that still leaves the question of a tri-board meeting. Is that still something that we,
What would the purpose for that be?
Or is it better to do that in the fall for the following?
Well, we had one
Yeah,
just
when
a
we,
few
when,
months ago, sort of to lay things out, so.
all right.
I mean, I'm not opposed to it, I just want to know,
I
like,
think, I mean,
Yeah, we're sort of, everything's half-baked by then, right? I mean, the two boards have approved their budgets.
yeah.
It's really on us at that point,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
All right, fair enough,
And we'll be at your meetings.
yeah.
How many more budget workshops do you have, Lisa?
So we have an all-day scheduled on March 4th, so we'll start at 8 and go, I think, until 4:30, and then
That's a Saturday.
a Saturday. And then if more are needed, we have some, I don't remember the dates, are they on there?
They are, yeah. I think, yeah, March 6th through the 9th are the additional, if necessary, Monday through Thursday.
So I'm hoping we'd get it done on the 4th, but there's a lot to go through. Obviously, this is a difficult budget, so there are going to be points of discussion and policy calls that I am recommending that my board may or may not agree with. So a little more discussion than years past, I think.
Okay, thanks.
And you do those in here, right? They're open to the public,
Oh, of course.
as they have been in the
Yeah,
past? And
absolutely.
public saying? Burke, does that, you have a similar process?
is what?
Do you have a similar process?
Well, I attend the CIP process because it is the one plan, but our timing is that Matt presented his budget to the board at their last meeting last week, and then they would need to approve on the 28th, the Board of Education, to prepare and forward for your March 14th meeting for that presentation. And obviously with the governor's budget that's come out, we've spent a lot of time looking at the details of that. In fact, tonight there were hearings scheduled by the Appropriations Committee in Hartford that related to some of these bills. And Lisa, Matt, and Tara Willerup, our chair, are going to be, I'll be copying you on this tomorrow. We have two letters to submit written testimony in regard to the House bill that impacts the pension, the pension liability expense, as well as one on the special ed changes in funding. And those are both very significant for us. But I think the concept of having a tri-board meeting, as I understood it, discussed by Matt, and I wish they had stayed longer, I think was to make sure that we're getting some guidance so that if we're presenting a budget on the 14th and then not kind of knowing what questions you have to see, whether it be for the meeting of the 14th of March when we first present, or at the future date, it's just because of this vast range of potential scenarios, don't want to be coming in with something that's obsolete right at the start of it. So, the town has to get through its process. We're a little bit farther forward, but I mean, I guess my understanding was maybe after your process was done that we should have a check back. And the end of your process is maybe March 21st, did I hear?
Well, that's when I present to you.
So yeah.
So my board will have a budget, hopefully by the first week in by March 9th or so. Hopefully on March 4th, we'll have a budget, and then I'll be working with staff to get our presentation ready for you. One thing you should be aware is just starting my budget process, just health and wages are at about 4%. So these are some of the struggles. When I said we worked very closely with the Board of Education, they've been great. I said, look, I'm not going to have a lot of flexibility in operating. Where I have flexibilities on capital, which is why we moved out a lot on capital. So when you see our budget, I just want to sort of lay that groundwork because it's not great. And the way I'm approaching the budget is sort of saying, well, what does local government do? What are our goals? What are we trying to accomplish? And I'm building my budget up to those goals and saying, this is what it takes to meet these goals. And then our board will sort of look at the goals and say, are there any policy changes? Do we want to offer less? Do we want to do something differently? But at some point, I mean, I have to pave the roads and I have to pay police officers, and that's most of my budget. So there's not, and a lot of it are mandates. We have to issue birth certificates, death to fix fire workers. There are things we just have to do. So there's not a lot of flexibility in my budget this
Is
year.
the contract still under negotiation for the police?
Yes, so we have 4 contracts that will be open in the following year. So how we budget for that will be impacted. They will not be done by Monday, certainly, not probably during the budget process.
Right.
So that's going to be an unknown that we're going to have to anticipate and plan for. And it's subject to arbitration, so we can't even, we know what other settlements are. There's a limit to what we can get in that. Obviously, our staff has been great partners with us in the past and will work with us, and they're aware of the situation. But again, there's not as much flexibility as you might think in that. But we will be looking at that as well, yeah.
Yeah, so just, I guess, just a quick question. So on the Board of Education budget, you indicated, Matt, that everyone, I think everyone gets in their requests by department to you, and they go up to Matt, and then Matt makes the revisions, or is there like an open process where the departments come in and present budgets?
We don't really have a departmental structure, so
Or
we
schools,
have a process that begins with each school principal submitting their budget for their building. Then we do have a K-12 special education budget, and some of our, that's really kind of the, I guess you could say, the overarching departmental budget. And then the superintendent, has made presentations, and we've had workshop meetings with our board. He gave his estimate last week, and now, because of the timing of the governor's budget, normally we'd be seeing, we would have, seen the revenue estimates, and we would have had a sense of our baseline, and this year it just feels very, very different based on these huge changes. So I think that's the status for us, is that the Board of Education will need to decide what it wants to do with Matt's recommended budget before presenting it to you.
Are the workshops, though, that the Board of Education sponsors, are they open to the public,
Yes.
at their regular
Yes.
meetings? And so it's the full board meeting. When Matt does a presentation, or do each of the principals, for example, present a budget, and there's an interactive process? I apologize, I just haven't.
Yeah,
been involved.
it's really done more by sort of major driver categories, such as special education, insurance, technology, supplies, professional development. It's really more cross-cutting. It's not each school saying, this is what that's not how the budget document lives. So we had a similar challenge, as this board did, where we ended up having 3 straight Tuesday nights with a weather or quorum issue. So we ended up having condensed workshop meeting and really, having to cover several weeks worth in one evening prior to Matt's budget presentation last week.
And,
So when do we get our books, and are those
So
before
you would typically get those about 4 or 5 days before your meeting on the
Where you
14th,
present.
and we would
Right.
right. So you would have the binder beforehand, and then that would be our presentation night.
So we do 2 binders, 'cause that's kind of the people we are. So our first binder will be online by next week after I do my budget presentation. That's my presentation to the Board of Selectmen, so you'll have access. You can just look at it then online. The books that we present to you will then come later, because it's slightly different charter requirements to you guys than we're used to that, but you can have an opportunity to look at that.
You're going to get a binder like this.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the exact same binder as the board.
It was similar to last year. So I just had one quick question. It would be helpful to me anyway, I don't know, to other members of the board. Lisa, I think you had included information a little while back on census increase over time. So that would be helpful to, I think, have, given that I know we've increased the size of the police force, for example, but we've had a population increase. And Burke, I assume you'll have revised numbers on school enrollment
Yes.
projections, and I found very helpful last year what you provided, the historical information, the number of student declines and the FTE counts. So that would be useful to have as well.
So we do have Jamie's report is in my first selectman's report, and also my first selectman's page. There's a link to it if you want to read it in advance. But if you want hard copies, we can certainly provide that as well.
Talking about the percentage increase and the net effect on the grand list?
Yeah, so what we had, actually, I was.
So would that also, would his report also have then, like, any type of, will there be any type of report on the grand list that would
Yes.
be negative as far as the overall value of homes? Or is it just?
No, this
So
is
it's-
just development.
So it's just development, so it's just gonna give us kind of one side of the equation where we're gonna see potential grand list growth, but we won't necessarily see the other side of it where there'll be grand list decrease.
From,
From the,
From
from
the
reeval.
Well, that's reval, though.
yeah,
I
that's
mean,
reval,
it's-
and that won't be done until next November, so, December, so we
Right,
won't have
but
that.
it would be, I'm assuming you're showing a projection of census growth and the grand list growth, correct?
So, not quite. So what he did, and we can certainly, if you want him to come in and give the presentation, he can. What we said to him is, take a look at the census data, which is 2010. Then take a look at the development data, and what are the projections of population based on these development projections that are coming in. So it doesn't include in-migration or out-migration or other factors or birth rates or death rates or stuff like that.
Right.
It's just the impact of the potential development will have on population and what will that mean. So it's not a full population projection, no. We had done this anticipating we might have to go to OPM, the 2.5% cap waiver. I'm hopeful we don't have to do that, but we had done that in preparation for that. So it's an interesting analysis, but it is online and it is in my first selectman's report, the link, so it's worth looking, and if Rob wants, we could arrange for Jamie to come.
Yeah. So we'll consider that. The census data is just head count. It doesn't talk about school-age children in
Right.
particular, or the
But it talks
demographics.
about grand list growth. And
It does talk about grand list growth,
and the possible effect on taxes.
yeah,
correct?
yeah,
So
but
that's why-
from a flat base, you're right. It doesn't assume any other buildings or properties go offline.
Correct.
Right.
Or that the grand, and it assumes that the grand list, whether your house is worth more or less, it's still assessed at that level until the reval happens.
Okay.
So it's not a perfect picture, and actually this was written before the governor's proposal, so probably the predictions are a little more dire because developers are not going to develop in this kind of economic climate. So it's just really a snapshot of what could happen. He tried to do conservative estimates. One area I would have been more conservative than him, in another area he would have been more conservative than I, so there are projections. And you'll see that the predictions get less certain the further out years you are, because you don't know, yes, they're out there, they've been approved, we think these things are going to happen based on our best information, but the economy can change. We're seeing that happened 2 weeks ago, and he just came out with
But he started with the approved projects
Right.
and the ones that are already coming up out of the ground, and then added some other projects that we know that are possibly going to come to zoning in the next 2 or 3 years.
But it's certainly not a certain number. It's
Right,
just a.
it's just to me, again, it's a kind of a one-sided number.
Absolutely.
Because we're just showing grand list
Absolutely.
growth, not necessarily any net effect of the reeval. That's my only point.
Oh, exactly, and we can't do that analysis yet, and actually I don't have the staff to do further analysis at this point.
Yeah, no, thank you.
It applies the same 70% of construction or appraised value for the
Yeah.
assessed value. So I hear what you're saying. I don't think it's off by orders of magnitude. I think it's interesting.
It's interesting, we just don't know if they're actually going to build what they say they are. We took our best bet as to when we think it's going to come online, but it could all come crashing to a halt, or it could go like gangbusters more than we think.
Thank you.
There was an article in the paper, I think, last week after the governor's budget was unveiled, and I think it quoted Glastonbury. I don't know if you saw that, Burke. It was, I think, proposal for
Big cuts.
like 18 million or something.
No, it's
and-
I think it was
or-
12, so they're completely cutting out their ECS, and then their share of, at least the pension obligation is over 5 million.
A million.
Yeah, it was a huge
It's
hit on
11 or
that.
$12 million impact. I don't, just also, when Bob was talking before, that, just to confirm, that number is spread out over 3 years, so that's something we could actually budget for in future years if it comes to pass.
Which piece?
The funding for the teacher's pension is a 3-year.
No.
No.
Well, it's, what they're doing is billing us for a third of the total cost.
That's what I mean.
Payments.
Right.
Right.
Right?
Annual.
One of three?
So.
No,
No?
we'll be
It's a
paying a
third
third
of
from
the-
here until
They
eternity.
pay the proposal is they would pay 2/3 next year, we would pay 1/3.
Gotcha.
And then whatever the next year is open to, we would assume the baseline.
Yeah,
would be-
that number
Could
is,
go to, but it could go up.
for the 17, 18 fiscal year.
And the irony of it is, we actually have to write a check to them December 31st before
Right.
we've gotten some of our reimbursements from them.
That sounds about right.
But that means that they won't deduct it, which is a good thing. No, because they could just say, well, you owe us this, we're just gonna deduct it from what we give you.
That doesn't work because
Cash is cash.
there's some cities and towns that they're not giving enough to take it away.
I saw that, yeah.
But they do have a penalty if you don't pay for 30 days, I think 5%.
Would be 1/3 of the employer's share. Okay.
Scary.
Yeah, so that's that $3.6 million number.
So that's one time.
That's
Every
every
year.
Every year.
And then
Right,
the next
that's what I mean.
year,
So
it's
next year,
3.8% from that.
But it's,
And we'll be able to budget for it next year.
I mean, the total arc, I think the easiest way to think about it is the total arc for the teachers is roughly $11 million. And they're saying, we need you to pay for a third, we'll pay for 2/3. And that would be the baseline for them. If that all went through, that would be the baseline for the next year. The proposal's not a third, then next year 2/3, then full.
Okay, that was my
That's not-
confusion. Yep.
So not to simplify this, but the state and the towns have four sources of revenue. Income tax, sales tax, property tax, and fees for services. And we have one of those that we control, and we have expenditures that we control. So this allocation of some of the expense from them to us and us to them, we send money to them and we get some of it back. He happened to pick one place that in his mind made sense because he's trying to equalize the rich towns with the haves and the have-nots. Rich town, that's not the right thing to say, but the towns that have, and you're right, no good deed goes unpunished, certain towns with surpluses. But having said that, the way he did it and how abruptly he proposes to do it is startling.
Yeah.
And it really, in the long run, creates an incentive to be profligate in your spending and screw yourself, because someone else should bail you out when you're in deep trouble. So,
Yeah.
just-
But the addition of a subset of sales tax that would be somehow regional that's the first I'd heard of that, but it's interesting, intriguing, hard to
It
imagine.
was floated around back in 2008
Yeah.
as well.
It's also part of the CCM report. If you guys haven't had a chance to look at that link, I worked on that report. It was a combination of urban, suburban, rural mayors and first selectmen coming together and saying, this is a bad situation, to Rob's point. What are some of the least worst solutions? And we all agreed, putting more burden on the property tax, which is already the most overburdened tax in Connecticut and probably in the country. We're one of the worst who relies on it. Was not good. And so the CCM did recommend, if you're going to raise taxes, do it on the sales tax. And you can do it either a statewide sales tax or some regional sales tax or some combination. But it's an interesting report. It's not perfect, but there is no perfect solution to this. The number is, like you said, unprecedented and daunting. And there are no good solutions. There are some that are less bad. And so that's kind of where we are.
Yeah. All right, much to talk about as we go through this. Appreciate everybody's continued attention to all of this. I think as we get our books and we look at the actual budgets, I would ask that we try to keep our eye on the big dollar items and the things that we control. That doesn't mean we can't go through the book in great detail, but to the extent that we're going to have to work harder, I guess, at finding some sort of solution. And that's going to be painful on every front, meaning the taxpayers, the reserve, the budgets that are presented. No one will go unscathed. So, and then we hope for better clarity, right? So, on that, I will seek, those encouraging and wonderful words, I will.
Meeting
A motion to adjourn.
to adjourn.
Thank you.